So today we wanted to talk about remote user research in the B2B context. And to get started, I just wanted to introduce myself. So my name is Tim Zurmöhle, as you already pronounced just right. I'm the head of design at Smooth Operator. That's a venture we started at Körber Digital. Previously, I worked at Magic Leap in Florida for a mixed reality browser, and then at Teak in a design agency in Seattle. At Körber Digital, we do quite a lot of research with our co-creation partners, and most of that is like in the manufacturing industry. We do that both for early stages and more in the later stages, so the development stage. Today, I wanted to talk more about that later stage because we had the most experience there with our remote research. And I wanted to share some of the challenges we had there and then what we've learned along the way. And I hope that can help you avoid some of the pitfalls we fell into and that you feel a little bit more comfortable with performing research yourself. I'll start this all with a little bit of background around B2B, talking about what makes that special, and then get into how we got set up in the beginning, and then how we transitioned into remote research. So a little bit about the background around B2B and what makes it special. Actually, I think that it is, from a design perspective, it actually isn't that different on a high level, but there are some challenges that you face along the way that are a little bit more pronounced. And I just wanted to quickly talk about three of them. The first of them is that the user is not the customer, and that is probably really special to B2B. So the person that's buying your product might be someone completely different than the one that's using the product. And even the person that's making the decision to buy the product is maybe someone completely different again. And that brings on quite a lot of challenges, that some of those I will be touching upon today. But nothing you can't get around. And then the second point I wanted to make is a kind of classic one in research, but it's much more pronounced in B2B. So you are not the user, and in B2B you're like really not the user. So there are differences in education, in income, age, experience with digital products. So it's sometimes fairly hard to relate. So that makes the research even more important, so that you stay close to the person that's actually using your product and learn from them and see how they would like to use your product. And then the last point is that the ecosystems are fairly complex. So there's a lot of stuff that happens around the user that you need to be aware of. So for example, for us, there are worker unions that we need to be aware of, that, for example, don't allow the people for us to record any performance of individual people. And so things like gamification, for example, becomes almost impossible at that point. And so there are just a lot of things you have to work around and be aware of, because they're also very resilient and sometimes just can't change or take a long time to change. Okay, with that, I wanted to go a little bit deeper into, or tell a little bit the story of how we got set up with starting to research in this space. So on the left side, that's you. On the right side is the user. And now we can just talk to those people. The problem is that in our space, there's just a lot that's in between. So there is your work you have to deal with. There is maybe the organization you want to work with, and then a department of that organization you want to work with, the user itself, and something that surrounds them as well. So we first had to really understand who the stakeholders are. So who's everybody that we have to talk to really organize our access to the user. So we first had to talk to people within our own organization, get the buy-in there, then talk to the customer, have them agree that we can perform some research, and then go to the factories, factory manager, shift manager, shift lead. So go through all of these layers basically until we finally at some point can talk to the person we want to talk to. Once we have had that out of the way, this is how we kind of got started. So we first went through and made a rough agenda. We organized how you can get there. So logistics around transport, how to move from one place to the other. We formulated an NDA for the people that we wanted to interview, GDPR agreements, incentives for the people. Then and then we could really get started with setting up our prototypes, all of our gear to like get recorded and get to the user and do our job basically. And so in our case, it was actually going really well. So we could go to the user directly, do the session as we've planned, and get a lot of insights from that. Now the biggest problem we ran into was actually a positive one. So we had a lot of follow-up questions or wanted to organize additional sessions. And now the problem that we ran into was that all of this stuff comes back. So you have to go through all of these hoops again to get access to the user. And that sometimes allowed us to only speak to the person that's actually using our product like once a month or even every other month. And so not enough time really to spend with the people that you want to interact with the most. And so the first learning we got from that is this. We set up a regular cadence, and that sounds pretty simple, but it has a huge impact, or at least had for us. So we agreed with all of those people I showed before that we can come in regular intervals and have people that we can talk to. And the advantages of this is that one, the users expect it, so it's easier to get in touch with them and stay in touch with them. Then it also allows you to define processes within your own organization. So you can start having basically weekly meetings with all of the designers to gather all the questions that they have with all the product owners, and then define processes around logistics, how to get there, and so on. And then what we also found, and I'll get to that later, was that it also helps with any unforeseen circumstances. So if someone gets sick, it's not a big deal because you just go back the next week, and so you didn't lose much. So how this looked like for us was like this. So we had two researchers that we worked with. They came from a consultancy that we worked with. Then we had our regular cadence set up. They were just continuously traveling back and forth, basically, and we could just regularly visit. So it was actually really great. We got insights on a regular basis, could talk to the people that mean the most to us, and get a lot of input and output out of this. And now this happened with what also happened to everybody else. So Corona happened, and at the same time, unfortunately, the people that we worked with were leaving. So we lost both of our researchers. No one on our team spoke German, and the people we interview or want to talk to, our users, all speak German. And so we kind of had to start from scratch. But we had our little shining light, and that was the regular cadence. So the users actually were still expecting us. So it was, we could have pretty easy conversations with them around how we can get set up, how we can continue that work, because they also suddenly saw the value in providing us the feedback, because they saw how the product changed based on the input they gave. And so what we did was we found an ally on site, so at the customer, and then we equipped them with everything they needed. So we sent them hardware, we sent them all the paperwork we needed, and then used that ally to get access to our users, so they could organize on site when someone needs a laptop to talk to us, or needs to set the prototype set up. So now I want to show you a little bit how our setup really looks like. So we have that main contact on site. We have a laptop on site with all the tools pre-installed that we needed, a smartphone there. Then we have a direct phone line to the room that they use for the research at that facility. We have printouts of all the legal documents in the room, a Slack channel with our main contact. Then we're using Lookback for all of our interviews. So that's a tool where you can see what the user is seeing at the same time as you see them, and can see their reactions and hear them, of course. And then for our prototypes, we are using Figma. The second point I want to make is test the test. So we, as you do, ran into a lot of issues. And what you want to do with remote research is try to control as much of that situation as you can, because in general you have much less control of that situation than if you're on site, because all of that human interaction is missing. You can't just like pull out a piece of paper and do paper prototyping instead. So test all the stuff that you want to test, and then you should be able to overcome any of the challenges you run into. And the testing we do looks like this. So we go through all of our prototypes, then make sure they can all be accessed. We write an interview guide, go through all of the prototypes again in a way that the user would see it, and then test this with the devices and the main contact ideally. And this is kind of what we do before every session, really. And it helped us a lot to overcome some of the things we ran into. And here is the things we ran into, just as an example, for you to see what can happen and what happened to us. So the first one is our main contact got sick. Then we didn't have any users available. There weren't any microphones or cameras at the user's location, so that's why we sent all of the stuff over, basically. We also had users that didn't want to be recorded, for example, which happens. We had the wrong prototype loaded, just went ahead with that prototype instead. And then we also had the internet at the customer side broken, and that was a big issue that we had to help them resolve eventually. And so the last point I want to make is the plan never really works out, and I think that's okay. That it just happens, and we try to again, take as much control of that session as possible. But still, most of the things won't really go according to plan. And I think it's important to just stay flexible, kind of roll with it, and have fun along the way. And what we learned is that you'll really learn something from the user in any session, just because you spend time with them. So even if the prototype doesn't work, even if the setup doesn't work out how you want to, you'll still learn something and can take something back from it. And I mean, we just started with this remote research, so I'm sure we haven't at all worked out, but so far for us, it has worked out really, really well, because we can really ensure that we do it on a weekly basis. And with that, I just wanted to share this last thing. So I've prepared a little checklist that you can go through this link, and then see all the preparations that we do in the beginning of research and then for every session. And I hope that that'll help you to get set up properly as well.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'm Jeannie Walters. And okay, I'm sharing my screen. Hopefully you can see that right now. Yes. Are the slides showing? Excellent. Okay. First of all, I just want to say thanks for being here. I always think it's kind of amazing that we can use technology like this and literally be all over the world talking to each other. I mean, we should not lose sight of how amazing that is, even though it happens all the time now. And I'm joining you from Chicago, Illinois, in the middle of the United States. And so, you know, what we're talking about with journey mapping in general, I wanted to talk a little bit about employee experience mapping specifically, because I think it's really, really valuable in today's world. And so instead of going into the minutia of journey mapping, what I wanted to do today was really talk about some of the lessons we're learning as we're doing more employee journey maps in this time specifically, as all these big shifts are happening in our world, and as we are dealing with remote work and things like that. So first of all, I'm Jeannie. Nice to meet you all. You can find me all these different ways. I have several courses on LinkedIn Learning around journey mapping specifically, as well as service blueprinting and some other things. And we have a 21-day challenge. You're also welcome to join. But I've been doing customer experience work for about 20 years now. And one of the things I've seen with journey mapping, which I think is really exciting, is that, you know, for a while it was a thing that people would see as a thing to check off. We did our journey map. Good for us, you know. And what now I think people are understanding is that this is really a tool. And it's a tool to help us understand our customers, or in this case, our employees. It's a tool to help us gain insights, possibly before the data tells us. So even using all the wonderful tools that are out there for customer feedback and surveys and all of those things, we still can find things out. We can uncover insights in journey mapping, I believe, that actually show up before that data can often tell us. And the way to do that, and the whole reason that I named my company Experience Investigators, is because I believe that anytime you do experience work, it's part science and it's part art. And some of that is just figuring out, okay, where do we need to dig in a little bit more? Where are those nuances? How can we understand this group of customers or employees better than we did yesterday? And sometimes that's really digging into the data, and sometimes that's going beyond and really looking for nuance. It's talking to customers, it's talking to users, just like Tim talked about. It's really understanding their entire ecosystem. So what's happening today, I believe, is that we're dealing with an employee experience that is not what we promised our employees. We brought people on with visions of workplaces that, you know, some of them had great foosball tables and excellent snacks and beer on tap and all these amazing things. And that was part of what we were offering people. Now, that's not true for every organization, but a lot of organizations had a workplace that was definitely part of the culture, definitely part of the employee experience. And then as COVID hit and we all had to adjust, we had to kind of throw everything up and say, okay, everybody go home, use your technology, we'll send you technology, we'll figure this out together. And I think there has been this sense of camaraderie, this sense of we're in this together that can be really empowering and inspiring. But I also think we need to recognize that our employees today are not living in the employee experience that we promised to them. And so some of the work that we were doing, we were actually doing some employee journey mapping in the middle of when this happened. And ironically, some of it was around specifically the remote experience. But as we dug into that, we realized that there were certain things that we still had to shift. So one of the things that I think is happening today is that managers and employers are reaching out one-on-one. We're really checking in with one another. But it's also time for us to really look at the end-to-end experience of employees and understand what is that really like for them. Because those one-to-one check-ins can be really informative. They can tell us some of those nuances that we might not get right away from the data. But then those bits of feedback that we get on a one-to-one basis can actually inform, okay, what do we really need to understand now about the customer or about the employee experience? And so this is from the LinkedIn Global Talent Trends Report, and this came out early 2020. And they talk about these 4 things that everybody needs to consider in the employee experience, the 4 Ps. And that is, as you can see, the people. It's a huge part. I think anybody who's ever had a job understands how important those relationships are and how, you've heard this before, you don't leave a job, you leave a manager. That often comes up. The place, and this is part of it, the where do we work? The product, what are we actually doing? What is the work? Is it stimulating? Is it something that we feel really engaged in? And then the process of, if I am following the rules, I want to make sure everybody else is following the rules, and I want to make sure the rules are not prohibitive to me being creative and innovative and all of these things that we want our employees to be. Now, I personally like to add the 5th P here, and that's purpose, because the employees who care the most and want the best for the company, their colleagues, and their customers, they tell me over and over how critical it is for them to know their purpose. So whenever you're thinking about employee experience mapping specifically, I would really consider this. Does everybody understand their purpose? And if not, what can we do about that? But really checking in as part of your research as you're developing your employee experience maps to find out, do people feel aligned with not only the 4 Ps that the talent report mentions, but also this bigger one of their purpose here with you. So let's talk about how to revise things for today. And the first thing is, there are a lot of ways that we gather feedback from employees. We often have an annual survey that might go out or things like that. And now I believe that right now, there's so much anxiety in the world that people don't have the mental capacity or the emotional capacity sometimes to do as much as we used to do. Multitasking is challenging for people right now. Shifting gears is challenging for people right now. And so if you are gathering employee feedback, I would ask you to consider streamlining it to what you need to know and what your organization can actually act upon. Because just like customer feedback as well, when we reach out to customers and we ask all these questions that we know we can't really do anything about, that's very frustrating for everybody. So unless you can really identify what can we do to act on this feedback, then it might be time to streamline that, to postpone that, delay that until things are a little bit back to normal, whatever that looks like. And once people are maybe working back in the workplace, or at least things are a little more settled. If you are gathering annual feedback, if you're gathering these different surveys, I'm not saying abandon those. I just think now is the time to be very, very considerate about what we're asking, how we're asking, and when we're asking. So that's one thing. As you're doing journey mapping, it's really easy to want all, I believe customer experience people are curious people. We all want to know everything about everyone and everything. And so it's really easy to get tempted to kind of pile up the questions, to really dive into the research, to look for all those feedback mechanisms that we can use. And I just want everybody to kind of take a pause on that, make sure that you're getting what you need in order to understand the experience. When it comes to the journey of your employees today, we need to really, if you have existing journey maps, now is the time to revisit them for your employees, because today's journey is not the one from even 4 months ago for most of us. And so really paying attention to, okay, what is it that we want to know about today, and revisiting those employee journey maps and finding those places where you say, wow, that's not reality anymore. Find out what reality is, and that can help you serve your employees and then eventually serve your customers as well. And then the other really, really important thing, I think, and this is something that we have, I'm seeing this as a really interesting point in where we are in the world right now, because when we talk about employee segmentation for journey mapping purposes, a lot of times what we're talking about, we're segmenting employees by maybe role or department or tenure, like how long they've been with the organization. It's very organization specific. And what I think is really important right now is that we are all in a situation where our life factors have a huge impact on how and what we're working on. So I know I'm a parent. I have 2 kids. So that means that throughout this time, they're home from school. That's a totally different reality for me. So even though I've worked from home for a long time, this is a totally different reality. And I think that when you look at people with very young children, some of the challenges that they have, there are also considerations around things like multi-generational households. So how are they feeling? How are they keeping aligned with their purpose with your organization? So as you're doing these journey maps, I think it's a time to get creative with who are your employee segments. And there are some organizations out there who are doing really creative things to support these different segments of employees. But what that also means is that these are employees who maybe don't work together, who don't have an opportunity to really share work-wise, but they might be able to support each other in this life way. And so finding those different segments can really help you serve your employee groups and make sure that you're moving ahead in the way that makes the most sense for them. So what I would encourage you to do is consider parents of all different ages. I think that's a key thing. I would also consider regionally. Are there places that you have employees that maybe don't have great internet access or don't have consistent ways to get that? Things like that can have a huge impact on their employee experience today. And then, of course, the multi-generational households, as well as caretakers. How many people were already a caretaker? And this is something that I don't think we're talking about enough in general, but there are so many people out there. I think last time I heard there are 18 million people in America alone who are a caretaker of some sort to a family member, meaning that they don't get paid for it, that they are helping with a child with disabilities, a parent who maybe is, older and needs their support, somebody in their circle who they have to be the primary caretaker for. What has changed for them is they might not be able to get the support that they usually get from the different social services, from, going out from the schools, places like that. So if that's heavy on their mind as an employee, that's going to show up very differently in their work than it did maybe 4 months ago. So when we think about employee segments right now, as far as employee journey mapping, I really encourage you to think about this, to look for things that you already know. However, we also have to be careful, right? We don't want to ask too much. We don't want to invade privacy. This is an optional way for employees to identify themselves. We never want to put employees in a situation where we kind of out them or make them uncomfortable. So this is something where you can ask and say, hey, if anyone is dealing with this, we really want to know what your experience is like. And then leave it up to them to volunteer, to say, yes, I would like to contribute to this conversation. That can be so telling right now, and I think it's really important to consider moving forward. So I just talked really fast. But if you want, just another plug here, because LinkedIn Learning outside of my courses is offering a ton of free courses right now for all sorts of things. So it's a great resource for you. And then I have some courses out there too. You can feel free to reach out to me and I can send you links. But I also just want to give everybody here kind of a little shout out, because I think it's a really important time to be dedicated to our customers and our employees And it's also a really challenging time. And so the fact that you're showing up here, that you're investing in your own learning, that you're really showing up for your customers and your team, I just want to give you a pat on the back for that and say thank you for doing that, because it makes a difference in the world today. I think in even bigger ways than customer experience work does on a daily basis. And that's saying something. So thanks for that. And if you want to follow up with me, please feel free. I'm always happy to hear from people. Experienceinvestigators.com is where you can find me. And I haven't been.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Jeannie.
Questions?
Yeah, let's wait for some questions right now. And yeah, what we usually do at our events, we allow people to ask an instant question right after the talk, at 1 or 2, but we also encourage people to postpone the majority of the questions to the so-called roundtables, so that they will be able to talk to you specifically, and others will join for other speaker. But what I'm seeing right now is, yeah, people really enjoyed your presentation. And Alan Razanova asks whether you can share any examples of great employee experience right now.
Great employee experience right now. Yeah, I think there are a couple things that are happening that are starting to kind of trickle out to, like, other organizations are getting inspired. I think one of the most important things you can do right now is look at how is your, and this is probably an America central thing, but healthcare, you know, providing extra time to people who maybe only get a few days off a year for sick leave, making sure that they have that. That's becoming very prevalent. The other thing I'm seeing is these online communities that support exactly what I was talking about, the employees who are in that situation. There are different, like Slack. A lot of us use Slack. I've seen different Slack channels that are just for, you know, working at home, or tell us stories about your coworkers, and those can be your 3-year-old or your dog, and trying to just like bring people together in that powerful way. And one of the ones that I really liked recently is, I'm not sure I'm free to say the brand, but they're a big brand, and they are actually doing pretty well because they sell groceries and things. So they're doing pretty well right now, which is unusual in some ways. And what they're doing is they're allowing their employees to really pick different, you know, they were a curated list of charities that they could then dedicate hours to. So they would still get paid as themselves, but then that would get matched and go to the charity. So it's a great way to kind of help people live that purpose that I was talking about before. So those are a few off the top of my head.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing. And yeah, one more question. And I would say that the last one for now is from Kira. So how crazy do you think is to create your first ever employee journey map and update it once the crisis is over? So what do you think are pros and cons for that?
So is the question about understanding the, like creating a journey map right now? Is that crazy? Is that the question?
Yeah, I think yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I think it's a great time to do it, actually, because sometimes we overcomplicate journey mapping. Sorry, but it's true. And we also sometimes act like we have to, the only way to get it done is to do end to end. I think that journey maps can be really powerful tools. And we could do that with, for instance, like if you're hiring people right now and they are getting onboarded and they are never meeting people in person, they're going through that entire process virtually. That is a totally different experience than being onboarded in the past, where maybe they would meet the team, they would go in, they would interview, et cetera. So I would say if you have something like that that you know is really different and challenging, look at just that part of the journey and really dig in and do a journey map and say, okay, what is this really like today? And then you can also start involving those new people and say, you know what, we want to know about your experience. We want to include you. What a great way to get engaged from a very early point where it might be challenging. They might not have those one-to-one connections yet. That could be a great way to build that rapport and relationship as well. But I would say if you know certain sections of your journey are challenging today, go ahead, dive in, just do that part if you need to. But if you have an end-to-end map, now is the time to kind of re-examine it and look at where you need to dig in more.
my name is Yana, and my team at UXPressia is actually driving different transformational projects for our clients. So we help them to kind of change and become more client focused and employee focused in some cases. And kind of journey mapping is one of the powerful tools of course we use as well. So since we also have a platform for journey mapping, you can gather that it is generally our thing. We like it, we like to do it a lot, and like we also really love workshops as a way to gather together and to kind of get people on the same page and get them to work creatively in different settings. So like that's something we use in our work a lot. However, as everyone else recently, we had to switch to a new setting, a new environment, and that also kind of actually touched some of the projects that were ongoing already. So what I'd like to show you today is probably kind of developing further this idea of journey mapping right now, how to do it now, and share maybe some specific techniques, tricks, something that worked for us, and maybe you can reuse it creatively in your next workshop. So what I'm showing today is based on one of the real projects. Ironically, it's also about employee experience. So it's actually a company who has dedicated employee experience team, and they had an initiative. They wanted to kind of to work on journey maps for two aspects of their employee life cycle. First one is new employee experience, and second one is kind of new leader experience, how it looks when you're promoted to be a leader in the company for the first time. And when speaking about objectives, of course, they wanted to find opportunities to kind of optimize this experience and to find generally good ideas. But another important objective that was set by CEO, who is kind of actually somewhat visionary, I would say, because he really understands the value of employee experience in general. He sponsors the team and advocates for them. So he asked us to engage leadership team into this kind of conversation, discussion, and asked us to facilitate the process the way so they could kind of see the experience of employees themselves and could have insights they would also kind of bring into their daily life. That actually was, the objectives were set before the crisis. However, they stayed relevant and like changed a little during the course of the project. So tools we used are pretty simple. So as today, we also used Zoom because of this rooms feature and allowing to kind of split into rooms and discuss things separately. We used UXPressia as a platform for actual journey mapping, and for the background kind of facilitators work, we a lot used Google Drive toolkit a lot, creating timings and stuff like that. And when we talk about this journey mapping workshop as activity, it is important to understand that it's part of the bigger process. It's not just like the workshop itself. So this is a snapshot from the journey management framework Nikita Efimov, my colleague, and I are developing for some time now, and probably will share publicly really soon. So you have a lot of important things you have to do before you go into actual mapping. But what we are talking about today is this kind of last step, the mapping, the two sub-steps. When you create a map and then you ensure that it's actually actionable, it creates some change within the organization. It's kind of, and you create some commitment to that change. So when you facilitate online, you will need at least 2 facilitators. And our experience, if you can have a third one, preferably being a pet, it helps a lot because, like, you know, but at least 2 people should be available because first of all, technical difficulties, and then it's really great when one person is speaking, another person kind of can set up the rooms and fix something, help people to kind of with links or props or anything. So that's the first trick. Second one, it's actually not even a trick, but when we are talking about journey mapping, generally there are some steps you need to go through. So you need to set the objectives, you need to decide who will be personas for whom you will build the journey. You will kind of decide on map structure or skeleton for your map. Then you do actual mapping, and then you do action planning. And usually in like our previous life, sometimes we've done it like this. So we would have a one-day workshop. So everyone had time to properly discuss like everything and do part of the process. Then we would have a break, preferably 1-2 weeks, so people could kind of do research, validate the assumptions they put in this map. Of course, timing can vary because sometimes you need less time and sometimes you need much more time for that, but generally it could look like this. And then you had another day, probably some offsite session in a nice place to kind of finish the map, create a strategy or action plan. And even in like before Corona time, it didn't always work like this. Not every company has resources and time for this. And when we speak about senior leadership, it's extremely hard to get so much of their time like at the same time simultaneously in one room. It's nearly impossible sometimes. So another option how we do it is having like 4 hours workshop, then a break, and then 3 hours workshop. In this case, we would engage part of the team kind of to do some of the work in the background, and I will talk about it a bit later. And another trick we could use and we can actually play with is what we do during the workshop and what we do as a homework. And for example, if you think about it, a lot of things could be done as a homework. You can discuss objectives before the workshop. You can actually do some preliminary research and define personas before the workshop. You can even define the map structure before the workshop. And so the most of the time you have during the workshop would be dedicated to discussing and doing actual mapping. And so in online setting, we changed it, and this is the formula that kind of works for us, and we kind of tested it several times, and it seems to be working. So you would have 2 sessions, 2 hours each. You will start with kind of presenting your homework, being personas, so sharing with the participants, hey, those are people we are building our journey for. And it's not very not very difficult, not very different if you build a journey for customers or employees. Like mechanically, it's the same. And then the rest of the time will go into actual mapping. Then you have a break, and in our case, this employee experience dedicated team, they conducted all the research in between to validate all the problems discovered during the mapping activity, and to kind of update maps and polish them and prepare some more information and insights for the second part. And the second part is 2 sessions, 1.5 hours each, which would finish the mapping activity and help create action plan. So when we talk about map skeleton, for those of you who kind of never thought about this before, it's really simple. You have like layers, which are lenses, which allow you to look through different aspects of your journey. And then you have stages, like steps or touch points in some cases, which your persona goes through. And that is something you can prepare in advance, show to your participants online, and only ask them to make adjustments, and it takes much less time during the workshop itself. And in case you need any help, there is a cheat cards kind of pack that UXPressia product team prepared based on what other people kind of use in their maps. So you can go through this link. We will share it in chat later as well, and kind of download the cards and use in your next map. And also you can have a kind of cheat sheet for the most popular layers people use. And you can use it as a start for your journey mapping. And then when it goes to mapping, you can see this map like kind of split the touch points are color coded. So we had yellow team and blue team who worked on different parts of the card. And the first workshop, the mapping, covers everything till problems or barriers. And we prefer to have separate workshop to focus on ideas, improvements, and opportunities. And I believe it's really valuable because kind of each activity demands different mindset. So that's like the preferable way to do it. And what's important to remember is there is a concept of points of agreements from the great book Meeting Design by Kevin Hoffman. The idea is very simple. The more people you have in the room, the harder it is to reach an agreement, the more points of agreements you actually have. So what it means in online setting, when every discussion takes even more time, it means that you need to kind of play with a number of people participate in each step of the discussion. So what the formula we use, for example, is for some parts of the mapping process, you need to work individually or in pairs because it's generating ideas or content of the map. Then you need to refine or discuss or develop those ideas. You can form teams of 4 people, which is easy to talk, but like it's manageable and it's not too awful in terms of like taking forever for everyone to speak. But then there are some certain parts of the journey there where everyone needs to be on the same side. And those probably the steps where you need to kind of get them all together and discuss together. And for example, in this journey, we would work on process or, for example, expectations in smaller groups. But when we talk about business goals, we would make sure we have a round where everyone, the whole team unites and talks about it together and everyone is on the same page. And another trick is that you need to give people very, very specific instructions. One step at a time, minimize switching between screens, preferably having some framing questions. And this is an example of a slide we share. And we make sure that people have all the instructions in one slide before they switch their attention to UXPressia, actually, because after that, there's no going back. No one will understand what we need to add to the instruction, for example. And then kind of the last important point here, the second workshop, ideation workshop, is based on the idea that oftentimes teams build the map and then like they focus on this one layer of problems. So everything else is blurred and no one ever pays attention anymore to what else is there in this map. And of course, it's important. Problem solving is actually the part of the reason we do the journey mapping. So like, yeah, it's important to do that. And you go really, it's really straightforward. So you find the problem, you create alternatives, how to solve this problem. Okay. And if talking about specific tricks, again, while working in UXPressia as well as any other online tool, I think that which allows commenting, it's really useful to ask people to put ideas in comments because this way you can see that, okay, there are some problems that attract solutions and some other problems that are ignored somehow. So you can see that immediately and guide people to kind of cover other problems as well. But when you've done that, what's important to remember is to apply different lenses. For example, we have about 9 different strategies altogether to make people see their map from different angles. And for example, if you take this brand alignment lens, you will probably see that there are no specific problems on your journey related to brand alignment. No one says like, okay, employees complaining that brand is not aligned. However, if you ask yourself a question whether we deliver on our process on each step, you might discover that, okay, this is outdated. This doesn't show what we want to look like on the market outside or inside. So that's actually what happened with the team we worked with recently. This was the most insightful strategy for them. They didn't map some things as specifically as problems, but when they applied this lens, they discovered huge gaps between what they thought about themselves and what they actually looked like for employees in reality. And like the last trick I would like to share and probably hope that we can continue discussion in smaller group afterwards is I would suggest, I would encourage you to involve also some individual reflection. So for example, you can ask people during the break to take a picture either of existing experience or desired experience. And for example, if we're talking about onboarding journey, this is the kind of a first day touch point, and someone made a picture how they would like desired experience to look like. So it shows the emotional side, the idea of how we should design it. And it also really helps to spark a conversation of what it should be. So this is a short overview of some tricks we apply when facilitating journey mapping online. If you want to reach out and kind of talk more, here's my email and also some links to UXPressia blog where I shared a lot of great stuff about journey mapping, personas and stuff like that. And I think that's it, and I hope we will discuss further.
Yana, thank you so much. That was really great. And yeah, I'll start the video as well. There is already one question. So Rebecca asks, how many personas is enough? And do we actually need to map the journey mapping for each persona? If you're ready to answer.
Yeah, great question. So generally, if you go to kind of classical approach, it says that you should have 1-2 primary persona, and also have like you might also have some provisionary ones that help you to have a better picture of your all your kind of user segments. And in my personal experience, I see that sometimes it's important for people to develop many personas for one project, like 5 or 6 even, and then decide which one is primary. Because otherwise, I see a lot more bias in how they approach building a persona. So they want to put all the features of different personas they are interested in into one persona because they're allowed to have 1 or 2, you know. So like, I think, but I think it also depends on the project as well.
All right.
And the second part was about mapping for each persona. Well,
yes.
Generally, I would say yes, you would have to consider journey for each persona. However, again, I can refer you to UXPressia blog because there is a great article with examples how you can kind of save time and try and map several kind of journey for several personas at once. And maybe that's something that will save you some time.